maybe they just completely refuse and you need to release them. But if you think that you see a person there that has the potential to be a leader, keep them in mind for a later date. Maybe sit down and try to have lunch with them and Mitch and talk about the topic more. The next C is cultivate. There are several things here. Cultivate a character, which is an inward measure of a person, and skills are an outward measure. Those two things you can cultivate. An inward, and when you think about character, you think about a person who is a servant leader, has a servant's heart. You can look in Mark chapter 10, verses 35 to 45 to read a little bit about that. They're a person who has a character of love and caring for other people. You can read a little bit about that in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. They should be a person of integrity. You can read that a little more about that in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. And fruitfulness, having the fruit of the Spirit in their life, and the fruit of the Spirit, you can find that in Galatians 5, 22 and 23. So those are areas that you want to cultivate with them, those character qualities that are inward character qualities that they need to have as part of leadership. And the outward things would be an ability to teach, perhaps. You don't necessarily have to be able to teach, but if not, at least to facilitate a discussion. And as John taught us earlier, there's a lot they can learn about that and be able to do that without necessarily having a gift of teaching. They should be diligent, they should be able to stand for sound doctrine, and they should shepherd other people with eagerness. And the last C is coaching. And as you coach, you sort of begin, you show them, and then they help you. Later, you may help them, and then ultimately they lead on their own. And they talk about this as kind of going through the 3 stages that people grow through as they grow up and mature. Begin with dependence, which is kind of corresponds to infancy, where they're dependent on you for coaching and teaching and kind of taking them by the hand step by step. The next step is corresponds to adolescence, and that's independence. They begin to act independently and act on their own. This can be a challenging time because sometimes when they're beginning to feel independence, kind of like having a teenager for a child, or at times maybe you have to go in and give some correction, things like that. And then ultimately is interdependence, which corresponds to adulthood, when they become, in effect, a colleague, a fellow leader with you, and you can work together with them. Just a few tips about this whole process. One is take time, and that means take time with your apprentice leader, whether you invite them to come early, stay late, get together for coffee from time to time, those kinds of things. Take time with your apprentice leader, so it's not just the time in the group, but some other time as well. Second take is take them to training. And if they're an apprentice, make sure they come to the next session of training. Another thing you can do is find some time that you could sit down with that person and watch one of the videos that Mitch is recording here or has recorded earlier. Take 20 minutes and watch one of those videos with them, and then talk about what you learned and what you saw. Pray with them and for them. Make sure that prayer is a significant part of your working with your apprentice. And number 4, encourage them to find an apprentice as well. As the church grows and needs more leaders, there's nothing better than to train a person to really be a disciple, and that discipling means they're discipling other people as well. So encourage them to think about an apprentice, another apprentice. And as you're working with apprentices, you can as easily work with 2 as work with 1. And so make that time effective. And the final thing is be intentional. Don't assume that just because somebody's in your group and they're an active participant, that they're really going to be an apprentice leader just because you tell them you'd like them to come and maybe come early, but really be intentional about recruiting someone and then about working with them and helping them become a real disciple. Questions or comments? Tell me about your experiences in recruiting apprentice leaders. John?
Not had much luck in this area, and I think part of it is that I haven't been super intentional on that last point. I'm just curious how much you need to tell them in advance. Like, one person that I approached and ended up running our group, or running a group during the summer while we were off. Is it appropriate to go to them and say, hey, I want you to be my apprentice because I want you to start a whole new group, and I think you're going to be a great leader, and so you're going to go off and start another group in the future, and blah, blah. Like, how much do you spill the beans on, the future? So like what Ray was talking about this morning, like, God, just give us the next step versus, if I woke up tomorrow morning and God said, I want you to be a missionary to Africa, I would freak out and run away, right?
Sure.
But if he says, hey, tomorrow I want you to, go and read a book about a missionary to Africa or whatever, and kind of leads me that direction, he could drag me to Africa, but he's not going to convince me to just jump over there and go, right?
Sure.
So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that part of it.
I think I would talk to the person about maybe coming alongside and helping you with the group to begin with and see how they do, and if they are ready to think about those steps of really becoming an apprentice. The whole apprentice process, you can usually think of from 12 to 18 months for somebody that has not done anything before. If a person has already done some other leadership things, they might become a group leader on their own much more quickly than that. But I would think about typically 12 to 18 months, and I would invite them to take the next step. And the first step is probably, would you like to help me with the group? And then go from there. But if you, as you say, if you tell them, boy, I think I see you as leading a group here at the church, you might scare them away and make them think, boy, I can't do that. But if you bring them along a step at a time, and they may be reluctant and not feel like they're qualified enough, and that's when you're going to hear those objections about, oh, I don't have time and I'm not gifted and so forth.
But what if I start with, God told me that you're going to be?
I think there are some times where you have a leader in the group,
right? And then you don't push,
and you're going to have to say something like, "Hey, I want to get you set up so that you're doing this next time." So they're not sitting there week after week, kind of like, I don't know if I'm ever going to, make my 18 months of training. They're going to get there faster, and so you can say that to certain people. I think what I like to do in a small group is if we're saying we got maybe 8 people there, and it's hard to get discussion going, it's intimate. I'll go, hey John, could you take these 3 right over here, and would you run through these questions? I'm going to take these 3. We're going to get the kitchen table. We're going to work through these questions, and in a little bit we'll get back together. And you can kind of trial run people that way to see how do they do. And it's only one Wednesday night or one Tuesday night that gets wrecked if you give it to somebody who's got, deer in the headlight going on. So sometimes they can test run that with people, and they don't even know that you're actually looking for an apprentice.
Very good. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Gary.